Vi og små, min sang skal det få, den gamle han giver nok for lov, min fejne søn, special og høn, så godt som det kan falde. Jeg spiller for en, jeg spiller for to, jeg spiller for hver og alle. Vind de skørt og blæk de tår, det kan de gode glæde. I prægte vænge dansen går, med fryd og migen glæde. Den bonde mand svinger sig over sit skæg, og så mod den grønne skov, og så mod den grønne skov. Så lunt han nu jeg min tro, så får jeg vel give for lov. Men lad ikke sige, jeg kommer for nær, lad han siger ikke bestjæle. Et kys eller to, det lader jeg gå, men brug jeg forstand vil de dele. Vind de skørt og blæk de tår, det kan de gode glæde. I prægte vænge dansen går, med fryd og migen glæde. Den bonde knyg slog sig ned af sin læg, og gik i den grønne skov, og gik i den grønne skov. Ej, vi og kære, vi danser med jer, den gamle han gav jo for lov. De svinger jeg ræk, som vej så let, som dun og spindel på rækken. Så går vi skoven to og to, og snakker om lysning hos frøken. Vind de skørt og blæk de tår, det kan de gode glæde. I prægte vænge dansen går, med fryd og migen glæde.
Welcome everybody to the 39th limited edition of the Giornate del Cinema Muto Pordenone Silent Film Festival. Thank you for joining us. I'm really delighted to have presented this film, which is just so beautifully, not only beautifully made, but also beautifully transformed by an exceptional accompaniment. So I'd like to introduce this afternoon our guests. First, Mary Simonson, who's joining us from Colgate University, where she's the director of the Film and Media Studies Department. Welcome, Mary. You need to, could you put your, unmute yourself?
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Casper Tyberg from the University of Copenhagen.
I'm here. Thank you, Jay. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Casper. And John Sweeney joining us from London, who accompanied the film this afternoon.
Hello.
Hello, John. I'm going to launch right in actually with you, Mary. You've studied quite a number of the Sacchetto films, but you probably haven't had a chance very often to see the films with accompaniment. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about how that transformed the film.
Yeah, this was just fantastic. I was so curious to see, I'm always curious to see with dance films how the dance scenes get handled, and then just how the drama gets handled. And I thought the work that John did was really great in both characteristically sort of conveying what was happening in those scenes in a really accurate way, but then also getting us into and out of those scenes in beautiful, beautiful ways where you felt the end of the performance happen, but then you also felt the continuity of the film continue. So yeah, I thought it was really a fantastic accompaniment, John. Thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that was really marvelous. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, John, would you like to talk a bit about how you conceived the accompaniment?
I mean, Mary's touched on an interesting point here. When you get dance and sonic form, it is often quite tricky, both in terms of actually finding the music to fit with the dance, both in terms of character and rhythm, but also a question of how you get in and out of it, how you get out of, say, the diegetic situation, which is happening on stage, and then into the drama again. And that was something with this film, which I spent quite a lot of time working on to try and find a way. I mean, I find it fascinating with this film. Also, you have this thing where you have her dance, which is very distinctive, and then you go to what I'm assuming is the Royal Danish Ballet School, going by the style of how they dance, the little kids are dancing. You get this contrast of two things happening. I'd be interested to know how, in terms of her dancing, her actual work. I think at that time, we know, as far as I'm concerned, I know very little about the dance apart from the sort of a ballet. There's a ballet russe, and then there's the traditional ballet companies working then. But in terms of work like hers, I've never seen something like this before.
Yeah.
Mary, would you like to address some of that?
Sure. Yeah, this is such an interesting time in dance history, I think, because, ballet is still strong and is happening, in Europe and throughout the US. But this is also the moment when the ballet russe, as you said, comes in and really begins to sort of shake up what ballet might look like. And then it's a moment, and this is the tradition that I sort of situate Sacchetto in, this moment of early modern dance and female dancers like Isadora Duncan, going out as soloists to perform. But I think, so let me back up and say Sacchetto was, inspired after seeing Duncan dance in Munich. Her mother was a pianist, a musician. Her father was a painter. Her brothers were painters. So it was an artistic family. But she saw Duncan perform and decided that dance might be what she wanted to do. And so she studied ballet, the traditional ballet at the Munich Court Theater, and then debuted. But her dance style is really not very balletic, actually, and is much more in line with something like Isadora Duncan might have done. She captured the attention of Loie Fuller, who was another female early modern dancer who used, scarves and lighting and was actually quite cinematic in what she did. Fuller took Sacchetto with her to the US to perform some, and that's how she sort of came to be known a bit in the US, but she was also very active throughout Europe during her career. I think she's both a dancer, but we might more, for our vocabularies, the term pantomimist might make more sense. She was really very interested in conveying narratives, conveying stories on some level. And then she was also most known for what were called tanzbilder, dance pictures, dance images. And so she was interested in thinking about using dance to interpret paintings, using dance to interpret music compositions. She had this idea that artists weren't able to, or artists working in visual or musical arts weren't quite able to complete their work, and that the body and pantomime was needed to create a complete work. And so she spent a lot of her career sort of looking at paintings, looking at music compositions, and then trying to sort of create a physical sort of manifestation of them, or transform and complete them somehow in her dances. And so I think we see a bit of that here. I have some ideas about what some of these dances were. I think many of them she performed on stage as well, or were versions of that. But I think that's the tradition we can think of her in, is these female early modern dancers, pantomime tradition, and then a little bit of the tableau vivant tradition too.
I was really, if you go to eBay, for example, and you type in Rita Sacchetto, you'll be amazed at how many postcards there still are. There's a huge number of images of her in various outfits, exactly what you're describing, Mary. Tableau, dressed in 18th century costume, the Pierrot, in Poiret outfits as well. So that presence and the popularity of her cards are still really, you can feel them by just going onto something like eBay. And there's that wonderful scene in the film when the Count goes to the counter and begins buying all of the cards. And it has such a kind of meta quality for me. I was thinking in a way of comparing it to Mistanguet's image, where she's constantly playing. Mistanguet is always playing off of her own image, or at least so often in many of her French films, Mistanguet Detective and different things like that. So the idea of clearly playing the dancer, partly playing herself. And Casper, in this sense, I was wondering, is there anybody else in Danish cinema that you can think of that's doing this? I mean, first the idea of just a dancer, a foreign dancer, becoming a star in Denmark seems unusual. Is that right?
Yes, I mean it's that is a bit unusual. I think that I mean there are several things here. I think that I quite agree with your point about the meta quality of the postcards. In the Nordisk collection at the Danish Film Institute, there is this sort of advertising poster cum folder for Sacchetto, where one side is sort of 16 small images of her in different roles. And I think that some of the images that appear there are the same images as you see in the postcards. So there is this double level is very clearly there. No, I think she's a bit unusual, both in terms of being, but in terms of being a dancer and also a foreign star. But I mean, there were quite a few Swedes and Norwegians in Danish film, but I think in some ways, I think that what Nordisk, in a sense, was trying to do there was to find a kind of substitute for Asta Nielsen, who notoriously broke her contract with them and went to Germany and had a big success there. And they were sort of, it seems, looking for sort of a female star that could do a number of different things. And I think that they tried that with Rita Sacchetto. They also tried it with Betty Nansen, who was a big star of the Danish stage, but not a dancer. Among sort of the major figures of the Danish silent cinema, I think there's the actress Clara Pontoppidan, who was, I mean, she's mainly known as an actress, but she did actually train as a child in the Royal Ballet School, and she also, before entering films, she performed barefoot dance on the Isadora Duncan model. So she sort of had some notoriety from that at the time that she became a movie star.
And then just in terms of how Holger-Madsen is using her as well, or just Holger-Madsen in general, I mean, just the way that the film opens, I love how suddenly there's this crowd of people who are filling the frame in such a wonderful way that brings us directly in, and that sense of the start of a theatrical performance too. And I love you talk in your catalog note about his use of mirrors and curtains as well, which is so beautifully done here without feeling like it's too heavy-handed. There's something quite just pictorial, beautifully pictorial about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, Madsen clearly had a strong visual sense. This is one of his, I think, first films for Nordisk. He was originally an actor and had played at various provincial stages, beginning in the mid 1890s, and then I think in 1908 he came to Copenhagen and became an actor there. And he was very celebrated as sort of a master of disguise, of makeup, and famous for using makeup for character parts. So he was in that sense technically very gifted, but he also, I mean, immediately sort of grasped the tableau style that was prevalent in the Danish cinema at the time, and was also then worked together with a cinematographer named Marius Clausen. And I mean, I think that most, if not nearly all, the I think 80 films that Holger-Madsen made during the teens were shot by Clausen, who was very interested in using artificial light, electric light, to create atmosphere in the shots, and that sort of combined with the strong pictorial sense that we also see in the way that he uses doorways and frames of various sorts. And I think that as I wrote, I think that this is it sort of inserts this subtle suggestion of the stage, of the theater, even into sort of the living room sets, and in that way sort of suggests the central conflict of the film, which is that our heroine has to abandon the stage.
John, there's a wonderful scene after she's been told she has to give up dancing, but she's in her sitting room, and then she just begins to do a little bit of a solo dance, and it's really a kind of just a magical moment. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about what musical choices you made for that.
For that bit, I mean, that was kind of instinctive in a way. I hadn't planned anything for that. I mean, I recorded the film. I didn't record it in one take, so it's not one performance, but it is based on a few takes. And that bit, I hadn't planned what I was going to do, and it just felt like it came naturally. And that's, going on from what Casper's just been saying, I feel one thing which is a real gift of that film is how the use of the doorways of people coming in and out of doorways, like going into another scene. Like there's, I think just after that, there's the bit where she goes out of her room and then she goes into that sort of vestibule area where her husband is about to go off to his club. And it's like there's a continuity which is given to you, but also there's a sort of, it's a new scene. It's almost, again, it's very like almost stage like. This people are entering in a new scene. I don't know. I don't know if it's kind of obvious. It sounds very simplistic, but it seems to happen a lot in that film. People going in and out of doorways, and the framing is so fantastic of how the whole setup is framed. But it is a gift in terms of musically that it gives you a way of getting from one scene to another in a smooth sort of way. But I don't know if that makes any sense at all, or if that's just me rambling meaninglessly. I'm not sure.
No. I think it does make sense. You know?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
I don't know, Casper, if you wanted to say anything about that.
No, I think John is making a good point there. I mean, it is clearly sort of a film about stage people by people who know the theater really well and are sort of able to use that on different levels to considerable comic effect also.
Oh, absolutely. And just what you're saying about knowing the theatre well, I was amused. I noticed it much more this time than I had before, that in the theatre manager's office, on the left is the famous poster for Madame Butterfly with a bust of Voltaire next to that. And then there's the photograph of Eleonora Duse as well on the right. Just, sort of the touchstones perhaps of European culture at that moment.
Yeah, I thought that was so striking in the theater director's office. I hadn't paid much attention, but the framing of that is really, it was really noticeable for some reason when I watched this time. And I think the other, picking up on this idea of all the curtains and the mirrors, thinking about Sacchetto's dance, and again, I have no idea whether this was something that was done on purpose or not, but very often she would start performances on stage in a frame and then would step out of the frame. So the curtains would open, she'd be in a frame, and then she would begin her dance. And so thinking about all of those moments where she's framed by doorways or framed by sort of the heavy curtains on the doorways or even by a mirror frame, there's something that is reminiscent and I think would have been familiar to any fans of her who'd seen her on the stage as well.
Yeah, that sounds very likely. No. I just wanted to agree. That sounds very, very likely. Yes.
But apropos of her fans, Mary, I was wondering, of course, in 1910, she's appearing on stage with Anna Pavlova. As you said, she was with Loie Fuller. Her name is prominent in all of the programs that you see of the time. And then she's in Denmark and she's making films. How much of her career did she continue on stage in tandem with her film career?
Yeah, I think through the first half of the 1920s or so, she was teaching. She founded a school in Berlin first, and then she founded another school in Munich, and then a third school in Poland, I think in Krakow. She married a Polish count. And so she danced, all through that time, and was also began choreographing for other people, but was making films, throughout the teens as well. And then I put this at the end of my note, but she actually had an injury. She was shot in the foot, and that was the end of her dancing career in 1924. And then she continued teaching. When she was shot and she stopped performing, though, she was 44. So she was not old. She was not old, but for a dancer, that was quite a long career. And I think by the end of her career, the aesthetics of the time had just moved way past where she was. And so she went from being sort of a popular sort of trendsetter of a dancer to someone who was seen as really pretty kitschy and almost inadvertently humorous. So it might have been a blessing in disguise that her career ended when it did.
Inadvertently humorous. The comic element in this film, which you talk about, Casper, very nicely in your note, is really quite present. And is this something that Holger-Madsen tended to want to put into his films, or how often do you have that? Because you expect this to be a tragedy in a way, and it's not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's rather unusual. I mean, again, quite a few films have been lost, obviously, and most of the Holger-Madsen films that survive are dramas, and they tend not to be very funny at all, and sort of. But I mean, here there's sort of a very distinct sort of comic aspect to the whole thing, and I think possibly, I mean, sort of the idea of the absurd duel may have been a sort of inspired by a duel that took place in Denmark in 1900, which gathered sort of a huge amount of media attention, where an actor from the Royal Theatre challenged a newspaper editor to a duel, and they actually fought the duel with pistols, although in a fashion sort of designed to make it unlikely that they would hurt each other, and so they both had to serve 2 weeks in jail because dueling was obviously illegal. But they was made fun of to an extraordinary degree. There were drawings and all kinds of stuff that just mocked these silly duelists. And so I think that still 13 years later, I think that there would be this idea that the dueling would be something kind of silly and absurd, and I think that the sort of the poison pills here certainly bring that across quite effectively.
I also find, I don't know if you feel the same way, the three of you, that because there's that comic element to it, when in the end it's clearly an ending we don't like. We want her to continue dancing. We want her to be able to be herself, to be the person that she wants to be. But because of the comedy element, somehow we can accept it more than if it's some kind of big drama. We somehow feel she might actually go back to dancing anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, when I was sent the film, I felt quite cross about the whole last bit of it. I really wanted it to go into a proper kind of meaty tragedy. I mean, even if it did have some kind of happy ending, it seemed too glib and too pat. But actually, as I was working on the film, I came to actually really like the comic ending and how it was set up. And it did slightly remind me, the pharmacist uncle, the comic relief all the way through the film. He did slightly remind me of the deaf person in Italian straw hat who resolves the plot in the end. And what I do wonder about is the sequel to this film, right? Because he clearly earlier on, the husband clearly earlier on in the film is going off to the club. He's clearly seems to have lost interest in her. Whether is his interest being revived by this whole drama, or what? It's a funny film in the sense that at the end, there's a very clearly happy ending. We don't know where these characters are going after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to think that she goes back to the stage and keeps dancing, and his sort of like concerns have been completely put at ease. The husband is such a goofy character too, right? He finds her on the stage. You know, he falls in love with her on the stage. He continues to like to go. He doesn't even recognize her when he sees her until she takes her mask off. Even though she's in a costume she was in his house dancing in. I'm struck by the comedy in it, which I didn't expect, because all the American press about this film is as if it's this terrible melodrama. But I think that so much of the comedy is the husband is just such a funny little guy. And, you know, I was struck by, too, so many of the films about dancers from this period have really risque backstage scenes, right? The impresario is a lecherous, guy after the young female dancers, or there is something really sort of dark about the theater. And in this case, what's backstage are these children dancing, and this, theater director who's just too busy to pay attention to anyone. So the husband's concern seems completely overblown, particularly given what's actually going on in this theater.
Apropos of the American press, could you talk a little bit about the reception of the film and Sacchetto's film career in general outside of Denmark?
Yeah, well, I can say about the U.S., and Casper probably knows more. In the U.S., this film barely got any press at all, but I think it was seen in the U.S. Very few of her other films made it to the U.S. I think 3 of her other films, and there's very, very little press about any of them, really. Plot summaries and then sort of announcements. But given how she had been received in New York, particularly, you would think that there would be a lot more. But I haven't seen much at all in American trade trade journals about her.
Casper, could you say something about the distribution practices?
Well, I mean, the films. I mean, most of the films that Sacchetto made for Nordisk have been lost. The other one that survives complete is a film from 1917 called Hvor soverne glemmes, which is sort of remarkably Catholic, and it ends up with her becoming a nun, which is, really odd in a Danish film, because the Catholic presence in Denmark is quite minimal. So that seems to be very clearly a film that was sort of made for export. And I think that certainly part of the project, or sort of part of the idea of hiring someone like Sacchetto was sort of part of the international distribution strategy that Nordisk generally pursued, and sort of their efforts to sort of particularly to conquer the German market and also the other Central European countries, where Sacchetto would obviously have been very well known and sort of well placed to give a high profile to the company's films.
I'm glad Marco was just now, he put on the little clip of her in the Pierrot costume, which is just such a delightful musical dance number. And Mary, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the use of the Pierrot figure in modern dance, particularly at this moment.
Yeah, no, I think this was a really popular trope that many dancers were pointing to, both in dance and then I think throughout theater. It was popping up everywhere. Sacchetto staged 2 different Pierrot dances. One of them was a 3-act performance that she did with the Met Ballet, actually, while she was in New York. And the score was by Mario Costa. And it was a sort of full narrative treatment of Pierrot. And then she did a second piece that seems to have been much, much shorter, that I think this one is based on, called Pierrot and the Butterfly. It was scored by Stoyowski, who was a pianist, wrote a lot of piano compositions. He'd written a Pierrot and the Butterfly piano piece that she used for accompaniment. She performed this version in the US. And actually the photos that are, I think, the most popular in the US, or that have, are still in the archive now, many of them are from this performance with her, with the instrument and the butterfly flitting about. But people felt like this was just sort of a fun, and the reviews thought that this dance was fun. It was easy. It had a much more tangible reference, I think, than a lot of her other dances, which were, pointing to Velasquez paintings or things like that.
Yeah, John, you've played so many films that are set in with a dance milieu from this time, and what Mary was saying before about maybe we should be talking about her more as a pantomimist in tandem with the idea of a dancer. And I'm wondering, as a musician, how you felt about her performance.
She, in a way, she was easy to have ideas for, because she's very in the dances through this film. She's very clear in her intention and what is going on, and you aren't particularly tied, as opposed to, for example, with the kids dancing at the Danish ballet school, where you're tied to a particular rhythm. With her dancing, because it is more like pantomime, you've got a lot of freedom in the sense of how you structure it and how you pace it. But she's giving you a lot in terms of character. I mean, it seems to be it's crucially about character. All of the stuff which is in the film.
Another question I have for you, actually, in terms of musical accompaniment, the scene when she and the Count are on the boat, what you do with that scene is really quite, I found, extraordinary, because you have the sense of the water. It's obviously what you're doing with both hands, of course. You have the sense of the water, but also the sense of the emotion that's going on. You meld the two of them, the movement of the boat, the movement of the water, but also something very tangible with the two characters as well.
Well, you see, I find that the whole love affair, until we go to 1 year later, the whole love affair, I find very, very touching. And I find him very touching. I feel he is genuinely, he may be besotted with an image of her, but he is genuinely besotted. And it's very subtly done, I think, particularly for a film from 1913. His acting of his feelings for her are quite extraordinary. And then we have this whole scene on the boat where he asks her to marry him, but only on the condition that she gives up the theatre. We as an audience, we're all going, no, this is a really bad idea. But she doesn't seem to feel that at all. I try to kind of, as that title comes up about you have to give up the theatre, I try and have a kind of undercurrent of sort of unease in the music to that point. But of course, at the same time, you can see from the image on screen now, she's not feeling that. I mean, we know, so this is a not uncommon situation, which both with dancers, but also with film stars who married a rich man and gave up their career. That was not a completely uncommon thing. And it's funny, our reaction to it is so different from her reaction to the film. Then, of course, a year later, she's feeling more like what we thought. But this whole scene, I felt, is kind of a climax of this whole rather beautiful love affair, which for the first, I don't know how far it is the film, first 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes into the film, consists of.
Casper, can you talk a little bit about actually his shooting, the location work? I think is really is so beautiful in this, and how that fits into other films, both that he did, but also that other people were doing in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually, I mean, the big fountain that you see is a fountain called Gefionspringvandet, which is easy to recognize, but I've not been able to figure out either where the boating scene or sort of the exterior of the theater that they use has been shot. I have been wondering a bit about that, and you know they did sort of I mean, they shot mostly in the studio, but in many of these films you have scenes that take place in the streets of Copenhagen, and sometimes they would go a little further afield to find the right kind of location, and they were sort of very they thought quite a bit about what kind of effect particular buildings would have, so that they would use buildings that would seem sort of appropriately metropolitan, if that was what was called for. And of course, that since a lot of the Nordisk films were sort of dramas that were supposed to be set in great European cities, that comes up quite a bit, and so there's sort of an effort to make Copenhagen seem as grand as possible, and to sort of be able to play other locations as well. But occasionally they would go off. They would, I mean, quite often they would go across the water to the south of Sweden, where there are sort of a number of other locations that differ from the ones that you can find in Denmark, and use that to create variety.
Mm. One of the comments that we've just received, is there more of a story behind the duel scene being missing and then found again? You mentioned this in your catalog note, Casper, and I wonder, what further background you might have or follow up.
Well, I mean, it's the print that we have here is one that was reconstructed in the 1950s. You can see that the intertitles are the sort of characteristic titles that the Danish Film Museum used at the time, and they did a new print from the original negative, because Nordisk had deposited most of their negatives with the Danish Film Museum when it was set up in 1941. But in the cases where the negatives had flaws, then you know, those obviously carried over into the prints that were made at that time. And this is the case here, that the dual scene was taken out and used in a compilation film made in 1936-37 to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the founding of Nordisk, and to do that, they just went to the negative and cut out the scene and then put it into the negative for the compilation film. So I mean, there are a couple of these compilation films where we've found interesting stuff that sometimes it's the only bits that survive of the films, and in other cases it's possible to sort of reinsert it into the negative and make the story complete in that way, and that's what's happened here. So you can see that the intertitle that precedes the dual is in a somewhat different typeface. You can see that it's a modern electronic typeface rather than the museum 1950s typeface used in the rest of the film. So so this film has been scanned from the print, and then the additional scene has been reinserted subsequently.
I'm not familiar with the compilation films that you're talking about from the 1930s, so I could be completely wrong here, and tell me if I am. But is there any kind of significance to the fact that an element of this film was used for the compilation and promoting the history of Nordisk? Does that mean that Nordisk was giving value, shall we say, to this film, that it was well known, or is that just by chance?
I think I haven't actually seen the 1937 compilation film, but I mean it is I don't know. I mean, it seems that they took this out as a funny bit, because sort of the most, I mean, it's a scene from a Rita Sacchetto film without Rita Sacchetto in it, and it seems like if you wanted to tell the story of this important dancer being hired by Nordisk and appearing there, then you would take a scene where she's actually in. So I think this is probably more sort of something that was regarded as amusing and used for that reason. But I'm not sure, because I haven't seen the actual compilation.
Torben Meyer's presence is quite striking. He's in it a lot. And of course, he's an actor that we know and love deeply from the films that he was making in the US in the 1930s and 40s. He continued a career that lasted unbelievably even into I Dream of Jeannie. When I saw that, I was quite taken aback. How popular was he at this time in Denmark, and how frequently does he turn up in roles that are this substantial?
Not that often. I mean, he's usually, I think he's more, he plays smaller roles. I mean, for instance, in the film which was featured in the presentation of the Stumfilm Decay project that we saw before Ballettens Datter. The film featured there is from Piazza del Popolo, and Torben Meyer is in that as well, but has a small role as sort of an Italian villain, and so he's you know, he usually appears in bit parts. This is one of the bigger ones.
Mary, I'd like to get back to something you mentioned. Sacchetto's age at a certain point, and of course, when she made the first film that she made, if I'm remembering correctly, it was 1 year before this. So she's already 32, and here she's 33. That is a surprise for her to launch a career at that stage in film, I mean.
Yeah, and I wonder, Casper, if you know any more about this than I do. What I know is that someone from Nordisk saw her performing when she was in Copenhagen or somewhere near there, and tried to get her to come, and apparently paid her quite a bit. She was earning a pretty high salary, as I understand it.
I think so. I haven't checked this, but my understanding is also that she was very well paid. They did want sort of a proper star that they could use to sell movies. And I mean, when you look at sort of the printed materials from her films, it's very much featuring her and sort of the great Rita Sacchetto and so on and so forth, with lots of pictures of her. So I think that they and I mean, you can also see that this film, for instance, was marketed as part of a series, the same way that Asta Nielsen's films were sort of the Asta Nielsen series of 1912. Then this was the Rita Sacchetto series of 1913, or the second film of the 1913 Rita Sacchetto series. So I think that the sort of commercial thinking behind it was similar, that they wanted something that they could sort of pre-sell to exhibitors with monopoly rights, and also sort of use as to help push their other films, the way that Asta Nielsen was very successfully marketed by her German company.
And I imagine Sacchetto may have seen this as an interesting outlet, right? Thinking about her aesthetic and her sort of vision of art, you know, that pantomime or the dance that she was doing would somehow complete or would inflect other art. I can see, you know, cinema is a relatively new form. She encounters it. She's worked with theater. She's worked with music. She's thinking about painting, and so here's just a new medium to explore. And you know, the film that I've written about the most of hers is The Ghost of the White Lady, which I won't try the Danish. But there's again there, she is, you know, posed in a picture frame, and she sort of comes to life from the picture frame. And so I wonder to what extent she really understood, or maybe negotiated some with Nordisk, that she could bring some of her own ideas and her own aesthetics into this new medium at a time when, you know, maybe they weren't quite working as well on the stage anymore.
Yeah, I mean, even in the third film, the one that I mentioned before, Hvor soverne glemmes, the one where she becomes a nun, there is sort of it's a long time since I saw it, but as I recall, there is sort of a quite extensive scene where she does a tableau vivant show at this manor house where she's living for. After a dinner party, they do this in one of the large salons, and giving her sort of the chance to do these sort of picture frame poses that she was so celebrated for. So even where she's not sort of playing a performer. I think that they would try to, or maybe she would insist on, I don't know, I haven't seen any documentation either way, but it does seem that they would let her sort of do her the thing that she was famous for, even when the story doesn't call for it as strongly as it does in this one, where it's sort of very much part and parcel of the whole narrative.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's another funny footnote in her biography that in 1912, I think, 1911 or 1912, right before she started making films, she did a stage number that I've not found any information about, but it gets called a kinodrama. And the one sort of small review I found of it says something like, you know, she's trying to take the aesthetics of silent film and bring them on stage. And it was called The Sleepwalker. And I have no idea what it looked like. I have no idea how she was taking cinematic aesthetics and bringing them to stage. But, you know, I think even before Nordisk approached her, she may have been interested in silent film, again, as a medium, and what that might do to inflect or sort of reinvent her work.
Yeah, that's
absolutely
fascinating. No, that sounds really fascinating. I didn't know that. Yeah, no, I mean, it would be really, really interesting to know what that was like. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, if I get more, I'll let you know.
Please, I was just going to reinforce what Casper was saying. I just find that fascinating because we think of it as always the reverse. And the whole, you know, the use of the Del Sarto technique is influencing silent film gesture and drama, and then to bring it back the other way is really extraordinary.
Yeah, who knows what it looked like? It could have been a disaster. We don't know.
I'm assuming, Mary, that that Sacchetto's Polish count husband was more happy for his wife to continue her career than the count in the film.
I suppose so. And again, this is another sort of piece of her biography that I don't quite understand. I don't know how often they were living together. Eventually she goes to Krakow and opens a school. I don't know if he was in Munich with her at some point. But some of the sense I get from just reading bits of her biography, and she was still touring quite a bit until 1924, and then seems to have, you know, sort of jumped between different places, and then she ends up in the 30s living in Italy again. So I don't know what their relationship was like or how much he supported her, but presumably she continued her career and with money. So.
And Casper, another question for you, actually. The characterization that Meyer has in the film, we tend to associate that kind of comic figure, and oftentimes with some German films, actually. But it's my understanding Meyer he went from Denmark to the US. He didn't sort of go through Germany. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah. I think he was. I mean, from Piazza del Popolo is 1925, and I think that he quite soon after that went to Hollywood. I think that he was in. I think he's in Man Who Laughs, isn't he? The Paolini film. I think that was one of his first Hollywood films, and I don't think that he went via Germany. I think that he went straight to Hollywood.
Right. Okay. There's Thomas Christensen from the Danish Film Institute has, by the way, sent a comment. Thank you for a good discussion. So glad you enjoyed the film, and it sure helped that we found and inserted the duel. So yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Thomas.
Yes.
We're nearing the 1 hour mark, so I'm going to, and we have one other, of course, screening this evening at 8:30, the Laurel or Hardy program. Yes, contact Casper, Tom. Yes.
Just one thing, because in your introduction, when you were walking along the Corso, you said that it sounded like the Stumfilm DK project hasn't yet digitized all Danish silent films. That's it's a 5-year project, and it's only 2 years in, so there's still quite a bit to go before everything gets digitized. So it's an ongoing process rather than a finished one. But I think there's something like 80 films available on the website right now. So I would encourage anyone who wants to watch more Danish silent films to go and have a look.
Thank you for. Oh, sorry, John, please.
Yeah, I've got a very quick question for Casper. When I look at the website, why do almost all Danish silent films look so stunning? The actual preservation quality of them is extraordinary. Is this because were more negatives, more of the original negatives saved in Denmark than in other countries? Because the quality is extraordinary.
I mean, the Nordisk company was by far the biggest company in Denmark, and they produced sort of the bulk of the total Danish production, and they still exist, and they kept quite a lot of their negatives. So it does mean that quite a lot of the films we have are either, I mean, we can go in many cases the negatives are still around, or in other cases we have prints that have been taken directly off the original negs. So that helps them look good, definitely.
And also the incredible photo collection, which every time I go to the site, I'm absolutely stunned by the quality and the number of stills there are for every film. It's such a rarity, and the ease of access is something that I think every scholar and film programmer appreciates very, very much. I'm amused, Casper, though, because thank you for clarifying that about the digitization project. I thought you were going to take me for task for saying that Danish cinema was probably the best in the world at the time, or at least you're going to call me out on my hyperbole.
I thought about that, but I decided, we know better, but I'll let it stand.
Thomas has added a comment, by the way, that the Nordisk compilation film will be online. And they found several central scenes that have been missing in many films. We have inserted pieces in Atlantis, Flugten fra Sarayet, and more. This one is the most missed scene located yet. So that is good news that we'll be able to see this. And still 300 films on the way, much to look forward to, says Thomas. Thank you very much, Thomas. We do indeed look forward to that, and we are deeply impressed with the work that you've been doing and will continue to do. Thank you very much for joining this afternoon. John, terrific as always. Casper, thank you so much. Mary, thank you very, very much for the insights and for the company. So see you hopefully this evening, and in person, we hope next year in Portugal.
Oh, yes. Let's hope.
And thank you for a wonderful festival, Jay.
Yes,
and everyone there, you've done a terrific job under very, very difficult circumstances, and we really appreciate that.
It's an amazing team. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.